Hello, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reading you a true crime story called Divine Justice from the book True Crime Case Histories, volumes 4 to 6. If I do pronounce any names wrong, I do apologize. The 1970s were a scary time in the Pacific Northwest, especially if you were a young, cute teenage girl. It seemed that every month there was news of another young girl that had gone missing. In January 1970, 17-year-old Patricia Garrison was murdered as she drove home from her part-time job at Sea First Bank in Olympia, Washington. The killer had cut her scalp 20 times with a knife and stabbed her 3 times in the chest, once in the back of her shoulder, and 8 more times in her arms and legs. He then dumped her in front of St. Peter's Hospital, where she clung to life for 32 hours before succumbing to her wounds. 8 months later, 3 children were playing in a remote wooded area just north of Olympia when they discovered a human skull. The kids kept it as a secret for a day at their clubhouse before telling the police. Near where they found the skull, Thurston County deputies uncovered a shallow grave that had been scavenged by animals, in addition to more bones. They found a piece of scalp with long, dark blonde hair, a pair of blue jeans, white sneakers, and a polka dot swimsuit. Neighboring Pierce County officials suspected right away that it was the body of a missing 13-year-old Laura Lee Burbank. Laura had been on her way to a pet shop when she had disappeared 2 months earlier. Detectives already had suspected an employee of the pet shop, David Fisher, who had promised to show her some baby raccoons. Fisher was known to have a predilection for young girls, and his wife had found a pair of young girls' underwear in her home. Police quickly arrested Fisher, and he was later convicted and sentenced. Just a few months later, another young Olympia girl, 15-year-old Valerie Good, was shot to death by a stranger in her own home. Over the next several years, many more girls disappeared and were later found butchered. Some, like 19-year-old Debbie Potter, who was killed while leaving her job as a waitress at the China Clipper restaurant, were never solved. Several more in the Olympia area, like Linda Healy, Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, and Roberta Parks, were later confirmed to be victims of the notorious Ted Bundy. Though she was only 14 years old, Kathy Devine was struggling with the reality of becoming a young adult. She had fought with her young boyfriend, naively assumed that the end of the relationship was also the end of the world. She had cousins that lived in Portland, Oregon, and decided to run away from home. Her plan was to hitchhike from her home to Aurora Avenue, North Seattle, and make her way down to Oregon to stay with her cousins for a while. On November 25th, 1973, Kathy packed a small bag and left her mother a note, ending it with, "P.S. Don't worry, Mom, I'll be back." Kathy's mother reported her daughter missing to Seattle police immediately after she left, but runaways were common in the 70s. The police informed her that the young girls usually came home on their own after a few days, and it would be best if she just waited out. Less than 2 weeks later, a young couple were cleaning the campground at Camp Margaret McKinney Park, just south of Olympia. At the edge of a clearing, they found the partially clad body of a young girl. Her clothes had been cut with a knife. When police arrived, they found the young girl face down in the rain. She had been strangled, sodomized, and her throat had been slit. The wound at her throat had been disturbed by animals, and the stage of decomposition told medical examiners that she had been there for at least a week. The lack of blood at the scene indicated that the location was a body dump. She had been killed elsewhere. There was no wallet or purse found at the scene, and nothing to identify who the girl was, other than the clothes she was wearing. On her body, detectives found a suede coat with a fake fur trim, a white blouse that had been cut open, and dark blue denim jeans that had been cut up the backside. The jeans had a dragon patch on the left rear pocket. She was wearing one brown waffle stomper boot, but the other boot was missing. On her ears were a pair of gold cross earrings, and on her finger she wore a Florentine friendship ring and a blue-green zircon ring. The location of the campground was very remote. It was more than 5 miles from Interstate 5 and about 15 miles south of downtown Olympia, off a rarely traveled side road flanked with a dense fir and pine forest. Thurston County Police assumed the killer must have known the area, as it wasn't the type of place a person would to just randomly happen upon. When police showed the items of clothing on the nightly news the following evening, Kathy's older sister Sherry recognized the dragon patch right away. She knew the family's worst nightmare had come true. Dental records confirmed that the dead girl was Kathy Devine. Thurston County detectives worked together with Seattle police to attempt to retrace Kathy's steps as she left Seattle. One of Kathy's friends told police they saw her getting into a truck in Seattle near her home, while another friend claimed to have seen her with her boyfriend a few days after she went missing. The first step for investigators was to talk to the ex-boyfriend. Since he was underage, Seattle police spoke to the parents of Kathy's ex-boyfriend, and his parents allowed them to interview the boy. He confirmed that he and Kathy had broken up on November 25th, but that this was the last time he had talked to her. Police searched his home and he agreed to take a polygraph. He passed the polygraph and a search of the home provided no clues. The young boy was cleared. When the news of Kathy's death was released to the public, tips came in from all over the state. One tip in particular seemed odd. A neighbor of the Devine family claimed that he had witnessed Kathy's murder, but when police asked him for more details, he remained silent. With a search warrant in hand, detectives searched the man's home. In the man's house, they found several newspaper clippings about the murder. They also found a knife covered in blood, which was approximately the same size of the knife that would have been used to slice Kathy's throat. The blood, however, proved to be animal blood, and the man was cleared as a suspect. He was just a bizarre man fixated on the case. Another tip unfortunately went unnoticed. Police received a call from someone that worked at Restover truck stop south of Olympia. The man said that he had suspected a coworker was stealing from him and looked in the back of his pickup truck. The man claimed that he looked under a tarp in the back of his truck and saw a sleeping bag covered with blood, as well as a small single waffle stomper boot. The following day, the truck was completely and mysteriously burned in a fire. Sadly, the tip was not followed up on at that time. Detectives were left with only a few clues: the clothes she was wearing, and DNA that remained from a vaginal swab. Unfortunately, in 1970, the use of DNA as a crime-solving tool was more than a decade away. Days turned into months, and months stretched into years, but there were no clues. Although the case was going cold, Thurston County detectives kept the file open. Other young girls were still dying in the area. In the years that followed, the world became aware of one of the most notorious serial killers in history, Ted Bundy. By 1975, the sociopath had kidnapped, raped, and brutally murdered numerous young women in the same area that Kathy was killed. Bundy's prey were almost always a certain type of girl, young, with long straight hair parted in the middle. Kathy fit that description to a T. After his arrest and conviction, Ted Bundy eventually confessed to 30 murders, many of which happened in the same area around Olympia. It was widely believed that Kathy was another one of his victims. With days left before he was to be electrocuted, Thurston County detectives visited Ted Bundy in prison. With nothing left to lose, they hoped that he might confess to the murder of Kathy Devine and put an end to the mystery. However, they were surprised by his answer. He flatly denied it. Though many still believe that Bundy did it, detectives knew better. Although Kathy was a similar age and the murder happened to be same area of the county as Bundy's killings, it didn't fit his style. Bundy often beheaded his victims, but Kathy was not beheaded. Also, Kathy was last seen getting into a truck, whereas Bundy usually drove a Volkswagen Bug and used a sling or a crutch to make himself seem helpless. Kathy's family, however, spent the next 29 years after her death believing that Ted Bundy had killed their daughter and had gone to his grave with the secret. By 2002, there have been massive advances in crime fighting with the use of DNA. In 1998, the FBI had developed the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, and made it available to a national level. The Washington State Patrol Lab was tasked with going through old cases from the 1970s when Kathy Devine's case eventually came up. Detectives had saved the DNA from the crime scene for 29 years, and forensic scientists ran it through CODIS. There was a hit: William Earl Cosden Jr. In 1966, 19-year-old William Cosden Jr. had just returned from an 11-month tour in Vietnam to live with his parents in St. Mary's County, Maryland. Cosden had been injured during combat and given a medical discharge as a highly decorated Marine, but in hindsight, he may have just had a propensity for killing. Just months after his arrival back to the States, Cosden attended a dance in the tiny town of Leonardtown, Maryland. Cosden had his eye on a certain girl, 22-year-old Helen Patricia Pilkerton. At the end of the evening, Helen made the biggest mistake of her life. She accepted a ride home from Cosden. The following morning, two teenage girls found the lifeless body of Helen Pilkerton in a nearby creek. She had been badly beaten, stabbed, and raped with a pool cue. Cosden was quickly arrested for the crime. The murder trial revealed what Cosden had experienced in Vietnam. The defense argued that his traumatic experiences caused him to develop homicidal tendencies, and because of these tendencies, his conduct was directly and approximately traceable to his combat experience in the United States Marine Corps. Their plan was to plead insanity. According to court documents, Cosden participated in the killing of over 200 of the enemy in a single operation, in which he distinguished himself as a fighter. Military doctors noted that he suffered from an uncontrollable urge to shoot his fellow Marines. Despite attempting to choke another patient, Cosden had been released from the military hospital in Philadelphia, only to return to Maryland and murder Helen Pilkerton. The defense proved that Cosden was not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was acquitted of the murder charge. He was sent to the Clifton T. Perkins State Hospital for the criminally insane. But within 3 years, authorities believed he had miraculously recovered, and Cosden was set free. After his release in early 1973, Cosden and his parents moved to Washington State, where his father purchased the Restover truck stop just south of the Olympia on Interstate 5. Cosden worked for his father at the truck stop, the perfect location to prey on young girls. Not long after his arrival in Washington State, Cosden murdered Kathy Devine. It's believed that she had hitchhiked from Seattle down Interstate 5 to the Little Rock Maytown exit, where she encountered Cosden working at his father's truck stop. After Kathy's body was found, Cosden went completely undetected for 2 more years until November 30th, 1975, when 24-year-old Beverly Pearson was on her way home from work in Olympia and stopped to get gas. She often stopped at the Restover truck stop and was familiar with Cosden. It was a particularly cold and snowy night, and once cars left the main interstate, the roads were extremely icy. Cosden offered to follow Beverly home that night in his truck to make sure she made it home safely, but she politely refused. She didn't live far and knew the icy roads well. As she left the truck stop and continued her drive home, Beverly noticed Cosden's headlights behind her. He had followed her anyways. Suddenly, his headlights swerved off the road and his truck slid off into the ditch. Beverly stopped her truck and slowly reversed to see if he needed help. Cosden asked her to get behind the wheel of his truck and try to drive it out of the ditch while he pushed. That's when he made his move. Cosden struck her over the head with a large rubber mallet, pushed her into his truck, and drove off. Still conscious, Beverly pleaded for her life. "Please don't hit me again," she told him, and she knew him and she knew his family, tried to communicate with him on a personal level. Cosden pulled on to an old logging road, stopped the truck, and raped her twice. Through it all, Beverly calmly kept talking to him, trying to make him understand that she was a human. She asked him personal questions and mentioned that they were neighbors. She begged for her life. Her plan worked, and Cosden eventually drove her back to her truck, sparing her life. Beverly was the stepdaughter of a police detective. As soon as she got home, she called police and reported the sexual assault. For the rape, 29-year-old Cosden was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 48 years in prison and was to receive extensive psychiatric treatment. Cosden sat in prison for 26 years before the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab linked his DNA to Kathy Devine's murder. When confronted with the evidence against him, Cosden admitted he had sex with Kathy but claimed it was consensual and that he didn't kill her. During the murder trial, jurors weren't allowed to hear about his past rape conviction or his prior murder trial and insanity plea. Despite this disadvantage for the prosecution, Cosden was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. On June 23, 2015, William Earl Cosden Jr. died of a sudden heart attack while in prison. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking my channel, and I will see you on the next one.